When Pope Benedict XVI stepped onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica in 2005, observers worldwide noticed something extraordinary perched upon his head, a towering white mitre adorned with golden embroidery that seemed to reach toward the heavens themselves. But what millions of faithful viewers didn't realize was that this seemingly simple ceremonial headpiece concealed centuries of hidden symbolism, political intrigue, and theological mysteries that the Vatican has carefully guarded throughout history. The papal mitre isn't just a hat. It's a statement of divine authority, a relic of ancient traditions that predate Christianity itself, and a symbol so powerful that wars have been fought over the right to wear it. Today, we're pulling back the velvet curtain on one of the Catholic Church's most recognizable yet misunderstood symbols. The origins nobody talks about. The story of the Pope's distinctive headwear begins not in Rome, but in the dusty ceremonial chambers of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Long before the first pope ever donned the mitre, high priests of pagan religions wore similar towering headdresses to symbolize their connection to the divine realm. The resemblance is no coincidence. In ancient Babylon, priests of the fish god Dagon wore a distinctive headpiece that historians describe as remarkably similar to the modern papal mitre. This connection has fueled countless theories about the continuity of religious symbolism across civilizations. When Christianity emerged from the catacombs of Rome to become the official religion of the empire, it didn't exist in a vacuum. It absorbed, adapted, and transformed the visual language of power that surrounded it. The two-pointed mitre we recognize today, with its distinctive peaks representing tongues of flame, wasn't always the Pope's signature headpiece. In the earliest centuries of Christianity, Roman bishops wore no special headwear at all. The transformation began around the 11th century, during a period when the papacy was consolidating its temporal and spiritual authority across Europe. The hidden symbolism in plain sight. Each element of the papal mitre carries layers of meaning that most observers never consider. The two peaks, or horns as they're technically called, officially represent the Old and New Testaments, the dual nature of Christian scripture. But dig deeper, and you'll find they also symbolize the Pope's dual role as both the Bishop of Rome and the Supreme Pontiff of a universal church. The golden embroidery isn't merely decorative. Traditional papal mitres feature intricate depictions of saints, biblical scenes, and sacred symbols, each carefully chosen to convey specific theological messages. During certain papal ceremonies, mitres adorned with specific imagery are selected based on a liturgical calendar, creating a visual language that communicates to those who know how to read it. Perhaps most intriguingly, the mitre's shape, when viewed from certain angles, forms a fish mouth, a deliberate reference to the ancient Christian symbol of the ichthys. Early Christians used a fish symbol as a secret sign of their faith during Roman persecution. That this symbol would be encoded into the Pope's ceremonial headwear centuries later speaks to the Church's long memory and its practice of embedding historical references into its regalia. The lappets, those two strips of fabric that hang down the back of the mitre, represent the two parts of the bishop's teaching authority, doctrine and morals. Nothing about this garment is accidental. Every stitch, every symbol, every dimension has been debated, refined, and imbued with meaning by councils of cardinals over centuries. The politics of papal headwear. What many don't realize is that the Pope's choice of headwear has often been a political statement as much as a religious one. Throughout history, popes have used their ceremonial regalia to assert authority, challenge secular rulers, or signal theological positions. During the medieval period, the papal tiara, a different, even more elaborate crown-like headdress, became the ultimate symbol of papal power. Adorned with 3 crowns stacked atop one another, it represented the Pope's authority over the Church militant on earth, the Church suffering in purgatory, and the Church triumphant in heaven. It also signaled the Pope's claim to temporal authority over earthly kingdoms, a claim that brought Rome into conflict with emperors and kings throughout Europe. The last pope to be crowned with the traditional tiara was Paul VI in 1963. In a stunning break with tradition, Paul VI later donated his tiara to the poor, signaling a shift toward a more humble papacy. Since then, popes have generally opted for simpler mitres during official ceremonies, though the symbolism embedded in these simpler versions remains profound. Pope John Paul I, who reigned for only 33 days in 1978, refused to wear the tiara altogether during his installation, choosing instead a simple mitre. This seemingly minor choice sent shockwaves through Catholic traditionalists and was seen as a revolutionary statement about the nature of papal authority in the modern world. The mitre that changed everything. One particular mitre holds a place of dark significance in Vatican history. The one worn by Pope Boniface VIII in 1300 when he declared the First Holy Year. Boniface was one of the most politically ambitious popes in history, and his elaborate ceremonial headpieces reflected his grandiose vision of papal supremacy. During the Holy Year celebrations, Boniface appeared before crowds wearing a mitre so elaborate and jewel-encrusted that witnesses described it as blinding in the sunlight. But his arrogance would be his undoing. His conflict with Philip IV of France ultimately led to humiliating outrage of Anagni in 1303, when French troops broke into the papal residence and physically attacked the elderly pope. Though Boniface escaped, he died within weeks, and many saw his fate as divine judgment for his excessive pride, symbolized most visibly by his ostentatious headwear. The incident established a cautionary tale within the Vatican. The Pope's regalia must communicate authority, without crossing into worldly vanity. It's a tension that has defined papal fashion ever since. Secret ceremonies and hidden mitres. Within the Vatican's vast treasuries lie dozens of papal mitres that the public never sees, reserved for private ceremonies, secret conclaves, and special liturgical occasions known only to the inner circle of the Catholic hierarchy. Some of these mitres date back centuries and are considered too fragile or too historically significant to be worn in public. One such mitre, known only to Vatican archivists and select clergy, was reportedly worn during a secret ceremony in 1870 when Pope Pius IX learned that Italian forces had breached the walls of Rome, and in the Pope's temporal rule over the Papal States. According to fragmentary accounts, the Pope conducted a midnight mass wearing a black mitre, a departure from traditional white, as a symbol of mourning for the Church's lost earthly kingdom. During papal conclaves, the secret gatherings where cardinals elect a new pope, specific ceremonial garments are used that never appear in public. The cardinal electors perform rituals involving mitres and other regalia that remain protected by oaths of secrecy. What happens in these ceremonies, and what symbolic meanings are conveyed to the headwear worn during them, remains one of the Vatican's closely guarded mysteries. The modern Vatican's calculated image. Pope Francis, elected in 2013, has perhaps done more to change the symbolism of papal headwear than any pontiff in recent history. He consistently chooses simpler mitres, often avoiding the more elaborate historical pieces, in favor of plain white versions with minimal ornamentation. This choice isn't mere personal preference. It's a carefully calculated image strategy designed to present the papacy as humble, accessible, and focused on the poor rather than on institutional grandeur. Yet even Francis's simple mitre carries profound symbolism. By consciously rejecting the more elaborate options available to him, he makes a statement about what he believes the papacy should represent in the 21st century. In the visual language of the Vatican, what you don't wear can speak as loudly as what you do. Behind the scenes, Vatican officials have acknowledged that every papal appearance is meticulously planned, with specific mitres selected for specific occasions based on the message the Church wishes to convey. When Francis meets with heads of state, he might wear a slightly more formal mitre to emphasize the Vatican's status as a sovereign entity. When visiting the poor or sick, he opts for the simplest version to emphasize pastoral care over institutional authority. The continuity of ancient power. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the papal mitre is what it reveals about the continuity of religious authority across millennia. The basic concept that a spiritual leader should wear a distinctive, elevated headpiece to signify their role as intermediary between heaven and earth has remained remarkably consistent from ancient Mesopotamia through Rome to the modern Vatican. This continuity suggests something profound about human psychology and our relationship with religious authority. We seem to need visual symbols of divine connection, and headwear that literally elevates the holy above the common serves as psychological function across cultures and centuries. The Vatican understands this deeply. Despite modernization efforts and gestures toward simplicity, the Church has never seriously considered abandoning the mitre altogether. Even the most reform-minded popes recognize that these symbols serve a purpose beyond decoration. They communicate theological concepts and establish hierarchical authority in ways that words alone cannot. what they really don't want you to know. Here's the truth that makes church historians uncomfortable. Much of the symbolism embedded in the papal mitre can be traced directly to pre-Christian religious traditions that the early church officially condemned as pagan. The resemblance between the papal mitre and the headwear of ancient pagan priests isn't coincidental or superficial. It represents the church's strategic adoption and adaptation of existing symbols of religious authority. This doesn't diminish the mitre's Christian significance, but it does complicate the simple narrative that these symbols emerge purely from Christian theology. The reality is messier, more syncretic, and more historically fascinating than the official story suggests. The Catholic Church, like all successful institutions, built upon the foundations that came before it, transforming and baptizing pagan symbols into Christian ones. The Vatican's reluctance to emphasize these connections stems from centuries of theological debates about the purity of Christian practices versus the influence of pagan Rome. Acknowledging that the Pope's most recognizable symbol has roots in pre-Christian religious traditions would raise uncomfortable questions for traditionalists who prefer to see Catholic ritual as divinely ordained rather than historically evolved. The legacy continues. Today, whenever a pope appears wearing his distinctive white mitre, billions of people worldwide recognize it instantly as a symbol of Catholic authority. Few understand the layers of meaning woven into its fabric, the political struggles it represents, or the ancient traditions it echoes. The papal mitre endures because it serves multiple functions simultaneously. It marks the pope as distinct from ordinary bishops. It communicates theological concepts through visual symbolism. It connects modern Catholics to centuries of tradition, and it projects an image of authority that transcends any individual pope. As long as the Catholic Church continues to value tradition, ceremony, and visual symbolism in its practice, the Pope's hat will remain one of the most powerful and misunderstood symbols in religious history. A crown that isn't a crown, connecting heaven and earth to the humble vessel of man called to be the Bishop of Rome and the shepherd of over 1 billion souls worldwide. The next time you see the Pope wearing his mitre, look closer. Consider the weight of history upon his head, the symbols hidden in plain sight, and the unbroken line of authority stretching back through centuries, from Benedict XVI to Peter himself, and perhaps even further into the midst of ancient religious tradition that the modern church both honors and obscures. If you love diving into the real history behind religion and power, don't forget to subscribe, and hit that notification bell, because this story might change how you see one of the world's most sacred books.